Hello, everybody, and welcome to Blissful Consults with Dr. Cammy. Let's get started right away with our very first question. Very much appreciate Abigail from California, who writes, I've gone to several therapists because I have low self-esteem and anxiety. When I share about my history, the therapist said my childhood was traumatic. Both of my parents were alcoholics, but I was never sexually abused or physically hit. I don't consider that I experienced trauma, but maybe I'm missing something. How do I know if I have experienced childhood trauma? What a really, really important question. And I think it's less about, and we can talk about the actual definition of trauma according to psychologists and the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. But what I think is most important to remember is that you're in therapy to support your own healing, your own development, and your own resolution of events that were difficult for you, that brought up emotional, physical, psychological pain. Sometimes it's helpful for those experiences to be named by a therapist, and sometimes it can feel pretty overwhelming. We might have lived our entire life considering an experience from our childhood as uncomfortable or inappropriate or overwhelming. But once someone names it, especially someone in authority like a therapist, as trauma, all of a sudden our identity changes a little bit. And it's hard to figure out how to get ahead of the wave of the identity that's just been created for us. We came into the therapist's office as ourselves, and we're leaving the therapist as a trauma survivor, capital T, capital S. That can feel very validating and affirming for some people, and it can feel overwhelming for others. So let's just consider this definition of trauma. And I want you to just remember, this is really the definition that I would use clinically. Meaning, would I do a giant research project using this definition? Maybe, maybe not. But I'm not worried about a definition applying to hundreds of thousands of people. As a therapist, I'm worried about a definition that's going to be most useful for clients in therapy who are working to heal. And I have often understood the definition of trauma is that the trauma is not necessarily the event itself. It's how our minds and our bodies and our spirits interpret that event. So let me tell you why that's such an important distinction, because there are some events that are unequivocally, you ask 100 people, is this a traumatic event? An armed robbery, a sexual assault? And everyone will say, yes, that is a traumatic event. There are other events that individuals might interpret as trauma for that place in their life, but there might not be a universal understanding that that's a traumatic event. So divorce is a great example. We might not say that's a traumatic event similar to going to war or armed robbery, again, using that example. But it is extraordinarily traumatic for many people, depending on the coping skills they have in their life, the way in which the divorce happened, and how they were left in their environment after that experience and event. Similarly, even when a best friend moves across the country, or you get into a fight with your significant other, or you're continuously put down through microaggressions at work. These are small events that over time really build up and have an impact. And they can also feel like giant events, and some of them are giant events, in the moment when they occurred. Another part of defining trauma is that it's not defined by the event itself. It's really defined how the event is experienced. And an important note in the definition of trauma is that it's an event that overwhelms a person's capacity to cope. And so again, this is very subjective. An individual could, at one point in their life, they could be able to handle something a lot differently than at another point in their life. There is a concept that there is just like a cascading series of events that just continue to erode our coping. So then something happens, we might get fired from a job, we might get into a minor car accident, and that's the thing that pushes us over and is experienced as a traumatic event. We might have difficulty coping with that event. We might continue to think about that event. We might even make negative meanings about ourselves based on that event. So remember, when you're considering whether something is traumatic, I don't want you to compare to other people. Again, that's not what we're in this for. We're in this for you and your healing. All I want you to do when you think about something you've experienced is to think, did I get overwhelmed by that experience? Did I have challenges coping with that experience? And did I interpret that in a way that was challenging to my mind, my body, and my spirit? And if the answer is yes, then you might benefit from trauma therapy to really begin to understand how to reconnect to the best parts of yourself, to your coping, to your community. And simply defining something as a traumatic event, it doesn't have to change your identity. All it does is provide a little bit more clarity on what you went through and how you have moved to the other side of it. I hope that this was helpful to Abigail in California. And if you want to talk more, just, feel free to email me. I'm always open for continued conversation.